So today I'm going to talk about English Language Paper 2 and I'm going to give you a technique that is going to save you a bunch of time. It's going to separate you off from about 90% of the candidates. It's going to make sure you can hit top level marks whenever you are answering the questions. The key thing here is it's going to save you time. Time is of the essence whenever you're doing any exam, right? But particularly this one, there's a lot to do in a very limited amount of time. And this technique that I'm going to give you is going to make a massive difference to it, okay? So what we're talking about here is the reading section of the paper. You've got a reading section and a writing section. You've got about an hour to spend on the first 4 questions, the reading section, about 45 minutes to spend on your creative writing bit, the persuasive writing at the end for Language Paper 2 for AQA. And within that hour of the reading section, you're probably going to want to spend about 45 minutes answering the actual questions. The first 15 minutes is your reading time, and they allocate you reading time for it. Now, what you've got in this paper are 2 different sources. You've got non-fiction sources, so sources about things that actually happened rather than fictional bits of writing. One of them is going to be very old-fashioned, usually Victorian. One of them is going to be usually very modern, often a 21st century piece of writing. And they're both usually about the same topic, right? So you have to read these 2. Now, the 4 questions you're going to get on these 2 sources, you're going to get one with a list of true or false statements on one of the sources. You're going to get one question where you're comparing inferences on the 2 sources, one where you're analysing the language of one section of one of the sources, and then one where you're contrasting the viewpoints and perspectives of the writers. That means that the majority of the marks for this reading section are based on comparing the 2 sources, right? Comparing inferences and comparing what the writers actually think, their viewpoints and perspectives, right? So the comparison is really, really key. Now, the technique I'm going to talk about today is to do with what you do while you are reading, okay? I'm going to give you 2 different candidates. Candidate A is literally just going to read the sources. So 15 minutes is just going to sit there, read through the sources, and then start answering the questions, right? Candidate B is going to use my technique, and I'm going to show you how it makes a difference to their eventual marks, okay? So as you're reading, what you want to be doing is having a pen in hand and annotating your sources. Circling, underlining little words and phrases in there, and key to that, not just circling and underlining stuff, but labeling things up. Now, you want to be looking for a couple of different things as you're reading that are going to help you with our questions. First off, you need to look at what question 2 actually is. So you flick to the questions first before you start reading the sources, and you look at the actual question. Now, the reason you do this is it's very specific, the question, right? So I'm going to show you some example sources. Here's a photo of some example annotations that I've done. And in this case, this was a source based on a Victorian boat trip, right? Both of the pieces of writing were both about boats and sailing in particular boats. They were about journeys and things like that. Now, question 2, if you look at it, right, here is question 2. It specifies that you should be writing about the boats, okay? It wants you to do some inferences on what the boats were actually like. Okay, now that question could be a lot of different things. It could be about the journey or the sea or the traveller or the food, right? If you know what you've got to be reading for, as you're reading the source, you're looking for details on the boat. And what you want to try and do is come up with some adjectives, some descriptive words about the boat. So is the boat very fancy? Is it new? Is it very big? Is it very scary to be on? All of those sorts of things, that's what you want to do. Now, if we zoom in on a little extract here, right, it says, ours was a very curious boat, ancient and much damaged. I can tell from that straight away, if I'm reading that, I'm underlining it, and I'm trying to come up with some inferences. So by inference, what I mean is I can't just label it and go, the boat is curious because it says curious. I can't just put it's damaged because it says damaged. I actually have to work something out from it. That's inference, right? So from very curious, I put that it's strange. From much damaged, I put that it's broken or possibly ancient. And that's what we're looking for. So for question 2, as I'm reading through, look for stuff on the boat, annotate that up, right? That's the first thing. What you're also looking for to help you with question 4 later on is you're looking for what the writer actually thinks. What is their opinion? So as I'm going through, I'm looking to see what emotions is the writer feeling. Right, that's going to really help you. Are they scared? Are they excited? Did they change their emotions from the start to the end? That's really helpful if you can. Now, here is the key technique. At the end of the source, when you've read that first source, what you want to do is bullet point a couple of ideas for question 2 and a couple of ideas for question 4. So in this case, for the boat, I've said that the boat was broken and it was also dangerous. And I know, as I've gone through, I've annotated, I've got quotations to prove all of those things, right? If I then look at how the writer's feeling, I've come up with a couple of emotions. Now, they don't have to be one-word emotions. You might be able to say that the writer feels disappointed by what's gone on, or they feel like this particular solution to a problem isn't going to work. That's something that they feel, right? But generally, they will be emotions. So in this case, my writer felt terrified and they also felt helpless. Now, for the writer one, I'm also going to look for techniques that the writers used. So in this case, they've used some similes to make it seem like the writer is terrified. So there was a simile, white and hollow-eyed, appearing like a ghost among us. So that's a technique they've used. You're going to need that technical stuff for question 4. And they were also feeling helpless, and they used a certain type of verb to show that. So I'll put that in my bullet points at the end. Now, if you do that, what that means is when you read the second source, you're already starting to look for comparisons. So if I've said the boat in the first one is broken and dangerous, as I'm reading the second source, maybe the other boat is particularly safe, maybe it's particularly new, okay, and that contrasts the boat that we got here. Or maybe it's exactly the same, in which case, great, as long as I've got quotations to prove it, that's going to really help. And the same with question 4 over here. If the writer over here is terrified and helpless, maybe the writer on the other side is still terrified, but also really confident in what they've got to do, right? So we've got some sort of similarity and some sort of difference between the two of them. Now, let's go back to our candidates, okay? Candidate A, who's just read it through, when they come to the questions, when they've got to write comparisons between what the boats are like and how the writers feel, they will have to go back to the sources and reread it, use a bunch of thinking time when they're actually supposed to be writing answers. For candidate B, who's used this technique, super simple. All they've got to do is look at the bullet points they've got already. They've got quotations to prove, which is what you're going to need to get marks. They've got techniques they can use, which is what you're going to need to get marks for question 4. And all they do is take those bullet points and then write them out when they come to write an answer.